Hello. My name is Emily Zinn, and I'm the Associate Director of the Carsey-Wolf Center, and it is my great pleasure to welcome Elizabeth Gabler and Marisa Paiva from 3,000 Pictures. We've just watched their wonderful adaptation of Lady Chatterley's Lover, and both of them are UCSB alumni, so we are very delighted to welcome them back to campus.
Ole, ole, ole.
So I have a few questions for them, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. So my first question is for Elizabeth. So Elizabeth, why Lady Chatterley's Lover now? I know the novel's been adapted at least a dozen times, including twice by the BBC, once in 2015 and once in 1993. And of course, Jolie Richardson, who's in your film, was Lady Chatterley in that 1993 BBC
We're very
version.
proud of that.
That's really cool.
As is she.
That's really cool. So, why return to this particular story now?
Well, one of the great things about my life was that I was an English major here at UCSB. And I think that part of my education prepared me for my career more than anything that I could have possibly even imagined. And one of my favorite books and one of my favorite authors was Lady Chatterley's Lover and D.H. Lawrence. Marisa and I were working at 20th Century Fox, and we found out that this project was in development and needed a new home. And it had always been something that had been very daring to me as a book, very challenging, and I felt like it was something that could be retold in today's terms with a very feminist lens. And as my younger counterpart, Marisa, also felt in her own way, she felt a passion to retell this story as well. And we had the most amazing partners. David Magee, who we had worked with on Life of Pi, was the screenwriter, and we were very excited to reunite with him, and felt as if today's vision of this movie could be told more from Connie Chatterley's point of view as a woman who wanted to seek her own vision and her own voice and her own freedom for her life and not be entrapped in what was that society's norm. And so we felt like through Emma Corrin's brilliant talents, we could bring that vision to audiences today.
Wonderful. Yeah, you have an amazing team on this film.
We did. We had a great team.
People. So, yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to ask you some more detailed questions about those folks. But first, Marisa, I want to back up a little bit and ask if you could talk a little bit more about the work of developing an adaptation of a literary text for film or TV. So what do you, as 3,000 Pictures, how do you describe what you do?
I mean, we work a lot with literary adaptations. I think
Yes.
Elizabeth, as an English major, has embedded that in all of us. And I wasn't the hugest reader, but I was a film studies major here at UCSB, communications major. And, the power of bringing a story to audiences that could watch it rather than read it is always something that we found, the power of the synergy between those two things. Yes. You inevitably cannot put everything from the book on screen, so we try to honor the fandom and we try to honor what's important to the author. Now, obviously, D.H. Lawrence is no longer with us, so we tried to honor everything about what we knew of him and what he wanted from this. But as far as our other authors, they're normally very involved in the process and very much. I didn't work on it for the company, but a cheerleader from the sideline of Where the Crawdads Sing this summer we had come out, and Delia Owens was very much a part of that process. Sure. That's always an important part for us, is to have them involved and on set and supporting it and knowing who we're casting as their characters. And the very first project I worked on was Ramona and Beezus, which was the Ramona Quimby series.
Right.
And Beverly Cleary was 93 when we made that, and I'll never forget when we went to show her the movie for the first time at her retirement home, or where she had retired with her husband, who was ill at the time. But we did a screening.
Carmel.
We did a screening in Carmel for her to see it for the first time, and she said, it's one thing that I wrote it in the book, but in my mind, it's what my kids did that inspired what I wrote. And, it's layers for authors. And so you have to honor what the authors, these are their babies, and it's really important to us. And so, but again, it all can't live on the screen. So you have to be a little ruthless at times.
So you see yourselves as collaborators in bringing their text to the screen and adapting it in a way
for a new medium. I mean, a lot of our authors have been really understanding about that. It's a new medium. It's different to read it than to see it. And that's sort of a guiding principle for us.
Right. Yeah. That's great. So I'm interested, coming back around to Elizabeth, then you mentioned working with David Magee. So, and I know you'd worked with him before on Life of Pi. So can you talk a little bit about why he was the correct person for this particular project and what vision he helped you put together for it?
Well, the project was in development. It had sort of a weird little circular life. It was actually in development at Columbia Pictures when we were at 20th Century Fox. So David was already the writer of the screenplay. But that was one of the things that drew us to the project and obviously to work with him again. We worked on it briefly at Fox, and then when Fox was sold to Disney, we left, went to Sony, and brought the project back with us. So it sort of had its sort of little roundabout life. David is a very skilled author at adaptations. He has done from Finding Neverland, which was the reason that we wanted to work with him, with Ang Lee on Life of Pi, and many of his other work has been a very, very skillful and surgical way of approaching an adaptation. And a lot of times when you see a film that's based on a book, you think it's a literal adaptation of what the book is. But in reality, if you go back and look at the book, there are structural changes. There are very, very judicious edits, as Marisa was just speaking of. And a lot of times there are the challenges of bringing a character's voice that an author can do in prose to life on the screen in dialogue. And so all of those things, he's one of those artists that's really capable of doing that in a brilliant way. So we knew that no matter what we asked him to do, and when we went through every phase of the process of developing the project and into production, that he was going to be right there for us. And he was. So, he still will be one of our very favorite go-to writers.
But I'll be clear, knowing him from Life of Pi, he's a dad from New Jersey.
Yeah.
He did not let his kids watch R-rated movies at the time. In no way did I think he could write the sex scenes as you see depicted here on screen. And those existed in the script with various detail. A lot of detail. And I called him and I said, his wife's name is Pam. I said, has Pam read this? I just knowing him as this loving.
This was a different side.
It's a very different side of him.
He wrote the new version of Mary Poppins.
Yes.
And Little Mermaid, the new Disney one.
So this is not precisely Mary Poppins.
It's not Mary Poppins Returns, no.
Oh my goodness.
But he's agile.
very, that's where you can tell the skill is when you can cross that many genres and do it so skillfully. Yeah.
Well, and enter into this very different set of experiences, right? This sort of imaginative projection into, a text that's about female sexuality, and I think he did.
He was also very protective of some of the really strong thematic elements of D.H. Lawrence's novel, like the little flame burning. There were very, very, very strong touchstones for him that were important that we kept within the film.
Finding ways to keep Lawrence's language intact.
Yes, because the language of the novel, for those of you who have read it, is very archaic, I would just use that word, and very regional. And we obviously couldn't go that way to make the most accessible film for modern audiences. So it was a combination of trying to keep the essence of what D.H. Lawrence was trying to say and moderate it into a more, I think, familiar language.
And I think you were able to retain that a lot with the play with the accents, right? Where Oliver Mellers does all of that, going back and forth between the really broad accent and the more cultivated sounding English, which he does in the book, right? Lawrence plays with that, where Mellers clearly can manipulate. the way his accent works.
Yeah,
for
like he'll say
different-
summit sometimes.
And that was scripted, but Jack O'Connell, when he came on, Jack is from Derby in the UK, which is where Mellors is actually from. And it was really important to Jack to represent the working class, the upper class, the transition in between being, an army lieutenant, that sort of thing. So that was really important to Jack, and that's all Jack.
Because the accent was spot on. That's good to know that really is
Yeah.
just him doing his own his own version of his regional accent. Obviously, it's for a different era, but
his rap gifts us were all Derby Football Club jerseys, so he made it known that that's where he was from.
Wow. Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, I want to shift gears slightly, Marisa, and have you talk to us a little bit more about the visual sensibility of the film. What do you think, your director, Laura Clermont-Tonnerre, and your cinematographer, Benoit Delhomme, brought to the film in terms of the visual sensibility? What was important to you about the way this film is shot?
I mean, so much about it is important to both of them, but I guess I could distill it down, have you guys just seen it, is that the difference of Ragby as sort of Connie's prison, and then the freedom that she finds in nature was really important to Laura. And Benoit matched that. He's our DP, which, for those of you who don't know, designs the shots most typically on set, and then there's a camera operator who does the shots per Benoit. And Benoit decided to operate also. So in the sex scenes, when you see sort of floating camera, that's the handheld that we used all the time. And that's Benoit behind the camera.
Operating
so he knew
himself.
exactly where he needed and had that comfort with the actors to be. And that was purposeful that we used the handheld in the Mellors-Connie relationship, that it was more free-flowing, that it was finding itself, that it was in focus, out of focus, and just sort of they're finding their relationship. And in Ragby, it's much more locked off shots and panning and up and down. And that was very purposeful to represent, again, what is most important to us is representing a character's journey, and Connie's journey in particular in this, which is very important to Laura to tell the story from Connie's journey. So everything went back to how she was feeling in the moment. So again, Ragby was sort of became this prison with
This
Clifford.
sort of static space, right? Where a lot of-
And nature became this free-flowing element that she was able to express herself as freely as she did with the character of Mellors. So
that's
the
great.
camera's meant to match that.
That's wonderful. And let's stay with the what you were talking about with the shots in the forest, because I think you're right to talk about the contrast between Ragby and the forest. But then the other contrast I was really noticing was the contrast between the sort of beauty in nature around Ragby and then the mines and the industrial setting just sort of creeping in. And my favorite moment when that happens is when Connie and Clifford have gone up on that high hill to sort of survey the terrain, and he's talking about, Ragby and the need to carry on, and you just hear that booming from the mines in the background.
Yes, the booming from the mines.
Yeah, I mean, that was, again, purposeful.
Yeah.
You're making a movie about three people, and one person you very quickly want to not be part of it.
Yeah.
You're rooting for Mellors, and so you want to be able to make Clifford an aside. And so Laura had this dichotomy between industry and nature. Again, nature was the freedom for Connie. Industry was what kept her trapped. And so you see that not only in the mines, which are represented from the booming and up on the hillside, but you see it in the house when Clifford is having the discussion with Bolton about the radio and the obsession about the radio and the modernity of the radio. You also see it when he upgrades his wheelchair from a push wheelchair to a motorized wheelchair and the obsession with getting that to work. So the mines were Clifford's way into that industry, but really the industry was meant to represent Clifford's, everything became not about what's here and now with Connie as his wife, and became about the radio, the motors, everything that obviously she didn't relate to, but things that, there was.
And upgrading the mines so they
This
could make
future.
fuel.
Yeah, so again, that was very purposeful in terms of painting Clifford's character, and that's what Laura was very excited about, was sort of in every scene after it became clear that they were not going to connect at Ragby as husband and wife, that the industry, through the mines, through the radio, through the motors, all came in sequentially.
And straight out of Lawrence, right? I mean, this is the dichotomy he's painting too, and so I just loved the way the film was able to do that visually and also do that with that wonderful, sound in the background. So
Thank you.
We have a lot of great bloopers of Jolie Richardson riffing off what the radio's saying, because obviously when you're shooting, there's nothing on the radio, and she was calling out soccer scores and stuff like that. So it was very fun.
Oh, she sounds like a hoot. Oh my goodness. All right, so I want to turn back to you, Elizabeth, and I want to talk about the fact that, of course, the novel was very famously banned for obscenity, and the material you're working with here is very sexually explicit. So can you talk a little bit about the challenges of putting together this film that is very sexually explicit material and trying to, put it out there for Netflix?
Well, we made a specific choice to make this movie with Netflix because of the fact that we wanted to have the freedom to be as expressive as we could be and make people feel comfortable about seeing it, especially as we were just coming out of the pandemic, as opposed to risking only a theatrical release, which would have been our choice at Sony. And I think we made the best choice by doing what we did. We had amazing partners with them. But the biggest goal, I think, for us as a filmmaking company was to make certain that the scenes with the sexuality were visceral and romantic and classy. That was really important to us. We wanted them to always be expressing something more about the emotional journey that the characters were going through, as opposed to just being a sex scene.
Right.
And that was really important for us, that each one was a progression in their relationship or a demonstration of the character's journey through life and their love affair and their relationship as they became just a passionate affair, which was basically born out of Connie's need for another human contact, to actually getting to know each other as people and falling in love with each other, and then realizing that ultimately they wanted to spend the rest of their lives together. So that was really important for us, that each one of those scenes was a stepping stone on that path.
Right, and the diversity of the sex scenes you have in this is fabulous. And then also, one thing that I find wonderful...
Diversity, there's a good word.
both with Lawrence and with your film adaptation is that there's this element of silliness in the whole thing, right? I mean, there's the running around in the rain and the putting the flowers on each other. And
That was really important to Laura, was sort of the playfulness of especially the dancing in the rain. That was a huge scene for Emma and for Laura to capitalize on the freedom of that. Like Elizabeth said, we made this during the pandemic, and we sent Laura the script when she was 8 months pregnant, living in LA. It was the height of the pandemic. It was like June of 2020. Too. It was her first kid, and everyone felt separate from each other. And
we never even met her except for on Zoom.
On Zoom, yeah. So until we went to set, but it was definitely meant to be sort of a love letter, if you will, back to intimacy and touching and all of that can be sort of, we talked about this, slightest moments that aren't sex necessarily, but a hand graze, or when she's pushing, the motorized, wheelchair from the back and she kisses his cheek, and just sort of things we were deprived of.
Even holding a little chick.
Holding the chick and trembling. And so we talked about a lot of things about touch, which was definitely influenced by the pandemic and would have been a different version of the movie should we not have all gone through that together.
Just that everybody was so craving that connection.
Absolutely.
I love that. And I just love how the film does portray the playfulness of the relationship, which I think is really...
Well, we did a chemistry read, which you normally do with two actors, in a room together between Jack and Emma, and it was over Zoom, which I don't even know why that was a thing, but it was the only way we could do it.
Right.
And you saw they recorded, minutes of it to send to us to see their banter and playfulness with each other just in communication. And you could tell off the bat they had chemistry. So we could only imagine once they were able to get in a room together what we would get.
That it would turn into something wonderful.
But we did have to really carefully calibrate what we actually shot to what is in the movie for ratings and things, I mean, there was more than what we have in there now.
So it had to be cranked down just a little to
there were other versions.
We have those saved.
Yeah, Marisa was there for all of it.
The extended version someday.
I saw
We'll
the
see
dailies,
that.
but I was already in California. She was there in England, Wales actually.
So I also appreciated that the film sort of nods to the banning of Lady Chatterley's lover by specifically referencing James Joyce. And I wondered, where that came in the process, who was sort of introducing Joyce into the ecosystem.
I remember exactly, actually. We give tons of notes on scripts, obviously, and some are larger thematic notes, character notes, and some are super tiny page notes. And that was a page note that David Magee put in a reference to a banned author at the time, and I said, I have no idea who this is. Maybe Elizabeth does because she's an English major.
James Joyce?
No, it wasn't James Joyce. It was someone else. Oh. And I said, I have no idea who this is.
So let's not go to the obscure banned author.
And I said, can we put someone that Marisa Paiva is going to understand? And he said, yeah, I'll look for a replacement. And that we give notes all the time like that. We are the audience. Yes, we're overseeing these movies and giving notes as studio executives with experience in this, but ultimately we are the watchers of this. And so if I'm not going to understand the reference, I would think some other people are not also.
The average educated person is not going to recognize this.
The non-English majors.
No.
At UCSB.
Well, I loved adding in the Joyce reference. I think that was really...
No, it's actually something that comes up in all the reviews. It's just the James Joyce reading Oliver Mellers. They mention that he actually...
Yeah, well, just as another author who's invested in thinking about female sexuality and getting banned. No, I think nodding to a history of books being banned for sexually explicit material seems really appropriate here. So, okay. So I also was interested, I was going to direct this question to Elizabeth, but actually either of you can take it. We're talking about that process of adaptation and where you're moving a novel toward what will work on the screen. And so I thought in that light, it would be good to talk about the opening, because I love the fact that this opens, the novel itself opens and Clifford is already injured, whereas this opens with a wedding, and particularly the moment where the fathers are talking about the need to procreate and have an heir for Ragby, and then also that fabulous backdrop where they're standing against a backdrop of Venice. So can you talk a little bit about why open the film there and what it does to it to have it open with a wedding?
Going there.
Dare we discuss budget?
Well, that's one reason, but ultimately, that's the only way that you can get a lot of backstory that you a lot of times will read in the course of a novel into the information that the audience starts with to begin with. It's kind of one of the crucial rules of, I guess, adaptations, really, because you've got so much backstory and you've got to let them know where they're starting from, where in a novel you can have a character's thoughts, dramatic descriptions, and a lot of other things that fill a reader in on what's going on in the story, but you can't do that in a film. So to not understand where they were in their lives when they started out, that he was not disabled when they first got married, that the change happened when he went to the war, all that you have to do in a really concise and close period of time. And we didn't want to just have, there were a lot of versions of this where we had like him going off to the war in the trenches, the 1917 version of it, and we didn't really want to repeat that. It had just come out when we were, and was to great critical acclaim and success when we were starting to get ready to make this movie. And so we basically thought, what's a way to do it that we could give the audience context for where the story is starting and where we have to begin to where we can get to in a really
Right.
fast way.
No, I love that. And starting with a happy Connie and Clifford,
Yeah.
right? I mean, then it gives you this pathos of when
And then you meet her
everything goes
sister, you see her
sideways.
father, and there was a lot of work done there to try and get that all across in a very short period of
Right,
time.
reference the rationing, reference the need for the air. No, you bang, bang, bang.
Yeah,
That's-
give a sense of the time period. Yeah, that was
right.
important.
And then also creating that lovely sense of closure with the Venice. You know, we get fake Venice at the beginning.
I know,
And real
yeah.
Venice at the end, which, Clifford still doesn't go to. So, yeah, I love that. And then I'm also interested in, similarly, the ending. The fact that you end with getting them physically back together, that the novel closes with just a letter. And you never get them physically back together. So,
Yeah, the ending is sort of a suggestion that they will be together, which in a movie is just like. So we went for it, and we decided David always had a version of them getting together at the end. It was never just a letter being written. It was always them physically together. And obviously she's pregnant. Her haircut is different. We tried to give a sense of the passage of time. We wanted to miss Mellors as much as she has. So those were sort of manufactured things that, not manufactured because Lawrence had them in the text, but just in terms of a visual or how an audience would have think about it.
right, the haircut is really
Yeah.
striking. And then just the fact that she is the one traveling, right? He's in this one spot and she goes to him. She's,
Well, being a modern woman was really important to Emma and to Laura, our director, was to represent, if Connie felt that strongly about Mellors, she would go and get him, and that was something that was important to both of them to represent, that Connie would never be a passive character in a period story, regardless of the times or the expectations for Connie, that Connie would always make the choice that Connie wanted to make.
Right. And this movement through space that just represents that, taking the car and going. I love that. So, and this is a good segue into talking a little bit about Emma. So I just thought their portrayal of that character was so amazing. And so I was hoping you could talk a little bit about Emma as a collaborator, but also about the idea that you have a non-binary Lady Chatterley and what that means. So Marisa, do you want to take that? You want to talk a little about Emma?
Yeah, I mean, Emma's obviously most recognizable as Diana from The Crown. So not someone that shies away from a tall order, and not someone that shies away from, it's not so much present here in our curriculum, but in the UK, a book that everyone reads.
Yeah.
So certainly they did in their high school equivalent of our high school experience. And Emma went at it, full force, and they just decided that they were going to represent it as a modern woman, obviously playing a woman, though Emma identifies a different way, was recognizing Connie as a woman. Connie is a woman in the 1920s who's married. Connie is a woman who we want to represent the modern woman for all the same plights that the 1920s represented, of control of women's bodies and all of that are still present now. And so it really wasn't that big. It wasn't that big of a discussion with Emma in terms of their identity, and obviously they speak to that much more eloquently than I ever could. But it really was about finding the right partner with Emma to represent that. Speaking to a question you had earlier about the intimacy, it was very important that what they showed, Jack showed, and we made sure of that. And so a lot of the nudity scenes, as you see, represented both of their bodies in a way that was
there was a lot more full frontal male nudity than you usually have in things.
He wasn't
Tell me
shy
about it.
either.
But yeah, I mean that was purposeful. That Emma, with their own journey with identity, wanted to make sure that Jack was showing what they were putting themselves, on display for as well.
Yeah. I love their embodiment of the character in terms of just like the sort of, both the sort of awkwardness in these social situations, and then just sort of stomping around the woods in these, I feel like the way Emma wears those period clothes is just fabulous.
Oh, Emma, like that scene of them jumping in the water was completely Emma and Jack, like at the end of a day, and it was freezing water in Wales. They wanted to jump in, and we're like, can we roll cameras on this? Because this is a great, like, cute moment between you guys. So, but that's very much Emma's like find a watering hole and they'll jump in it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. No, this just did seem like a good group of people to work with.
Yeah.
So, okay, and I'm actually going to stay with you and talk a little bit about being on set, because I understand you were on set both
Yep.
in Wales and in Venice. And can you talk a little bit about the experience of what you do in your role on set, and then, what it was like being in those two spaces with this film?
Yeah, I mean, the role for studio executives in general is to make sure that the filmmaking group, and I don't just mean the filmmaker as the director, but the filmmaking group is being supported both financially and creatively with what we need the movie to be. And what we need the movie to be means both to sell the movie, market it, what we all intended it for it to be, what we all signed off and hoped for it to be. So the role from when we're not on set is to sort of check in with those on set and make sure that that is all happening and everyone's happy and merry-go-round. When you're on set, the role becomes the day-to-day. A location's compromised, an actor may have an issue with a line of dialogue that you need to talk through. I mean, there's a lot more sort of plan of action on the day that becomes a lot different.
Immediate fighting fires.
Yeah, and in Italy, there was always, I got a guy who could take care of that. So that was always the answer. If there was, we shot on the main canal in Venice.
Right.
It's beautiful, and they shut it down for 7 minutes, in incremental 7 minutes amounts of time. I still don't know how we got it done, but we had a guy named Marco, and anything you asked him, he said, I got a guy who could do that. And I just said, okay, great. So that was sort of, it depends. It's movies are like living, breathing things. And in this instance, because we were shooting in Wales during a pandemic, it was already isolated. We were shooting at the estate you saw in the film, both the house and the surroundings is all the same estate. I thought we'd be cheating Connie's path from the house down to Mellor's hut. In fact, it's exactly the path. You walk down the hill, you cross those stones, and you're at the hut. Oh. So it's all geographically logical. And you're just used to cheating way more things.
So many times in the film, like we feel like we know how to go there now after having watched it.
Yeah, and sort of, again, thematically, for Benoit, our DP, and for Laure, the going from uphill to downhill was very important in terms of class. It was her leaving this castle, quite the castle ivory tower, if you will, and going down to Mellor's. And so I think that, again, these are living, breathing things. There's an actor that's going to have a note. There's a director. There's a costume designer. There's going to be a costume that breaks. There's going to be a costume that doesn't look right on camera.
Mud swamps in the grass.
There's living, breathing things about movies that you have to change on the day. That as studio executives, when you're 12 hours away from the action on a different time zone, you're just not getting those things.
Those minute by minute updates, but you're right there so that you can help sort things out.
And again, the Italians did it right. I mean, not a problem.
Wales may be more complicated.
Well, the Brits. Yeah. No, they were lovely. But yeah, the house we shot at had never been shot at before for film or TV. So we had looked at the house that Atonement had been shot in and other films you may have seen, and those are available. But we decided to shoot at a house that had never been shot in before. So inevitably that comes with growing pains.
And to what extent were you... to what extent did that house come with those furnishings, and to what extent was it
None of it.
No, okay.
So the rooms were right, and then we just kind of stripped them all of everything. The room where Connie retires to, and it has that blue and white wallpaper, and she cuts down the photos.
Takes down the photos,
yeah.
Great scene.
So we completely re-wallpapered that room. So what's funny is we did all the changes to the house, and then the owners, of course, kept it all because it was like huge upgrades. We repainted, we re-wallpapered, we did tons of stuff for their house. So they're thrilled.
I bet.
Yeah.
Well, I also love knowing that the geography of that works just with the extent to which you get Connie and Mellors lingering at that border, right? The border
The
between
gate
the
was
forest
actually
and, yeah.
there. I mean,
Did we
again, like we normally cheat all those things.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time there in the
Yeah,
film, and that's
yeah.
great. Oh, good.
Yeah, it was an encampment
Yep.
up there.
Yeah.
So, Elizabeth, I want to go back out to a more macro level again and ask about how you decide whether a particular text might be good for adapting into film or TV. What are you looking for? What kinds of things tend to speak to you?
Well, I think we are very much in sync after working together for many years about this very subject. But ultimately, we look for, obviously, a storyline that can be adapted. I mean, there are many books that are absolutely wonderful, and it's very difficult to translate that author's prose into cinematic form. So you need to find something where you can actually find a very clear concept, a sellable concept, an idea that makes sense to an audience that's going to go buy a ticket or turn on to a platform to watch this story. Also, I think we always look for a very strong emotional journey for the characters. That's really important, that we connect to the characters, that we find characters that are interesting. We tend to not go to the more dark and bizarre stories in our tastes at 3,000 Pictures as we did at 2,000 at Fox before this. So a lot of the stories that we've told are deemed untellable, like Life of Pi, for example, which seemed to be the impossible one. But for us, it was the story of a young boy who had survived great tragedy and lived alone in a lifeboat with this tiger.
Yeah, it just happened to have a tiger in the middle of it. Yeah.
But transcended dialogue and language and could be basically what we felt was the first international family film, because you didn't need words. It was all there in the imagery. And of course, one of the other things that draws us to material is, will this attract a filmmaker that we really want to work with? And that has been really our, I think, touchstone, is to work with filmmakers that we believe in and that we are inspired by. And we have been successful in doing that through the years. And so it's filmmakers, actors, composers, everybody, it's just you just want to bring the best of the best to what you do.
Sure.
And have a great time doing it and be successful at it.
Say also that, having worked for Elizabeth for so long, is that we really only want to put things out in the world that are good and that inspire and that are about sort of the triumph of the human spirit. And, even from the micro, like an Indian boy in a boat with a tiger, I mean, that seems very small, but the message was universal. And the same thing applied to Hidden Figures, the movie we did. That, Black woman working at NASA, mathematician, 3 things I am not. But that was something that we felt had a universal appeal that would mean something to people and that people could relate to. And
such an important story to tell.
Universality of stories that have been deemed unmakeable or very tough, or God, this one's a really tough one. We've always sort of seen the light of where it could touch many more lives than
even Devil Wears Prada, which everybody thinks was so easy. That one was so hard. I mean, here we are all these years later. Every time I turn around, we're celebrating the 5th anniversary, the 10th anniversary. It's just, but it's lived on and it's stayed there. But we bought that as a 50-page partial manuscript with a title, and we didn't even know what the rest of the story was going to be. But the concept, the characters, and the title were so strong that we knew we could figure it out. And yet, at the time, it was a nail-biter all the way down to the first weekend that it was released.
Well, and it worked out.
Yeah, but you're knocking on wood, you got bloody knuckles all the time, lighting candles here and there.
I'm going to turn to audience questions in just a moment, but before I do, the one last thing I want to ask the two of you is what else can you tell us about what you're working on? What is on deck now for 3,000 Pictures?
All right. Well,
Tell 'em.
we've been working for almost 9 months to close the rights to the life story of Bruce Lee, which will be directed by Ang Lee. So that's reuniting us with our dear friend, and about to be announced. So you guys are probably the first people to actually hear it. But we had a breakthrough today with the chain of title. We're hoping this is all going to happen. And we are very excited to say also that Ang Lee's son, Mason Lee, will be playing Bruce Lee. He's an actor. He was just nominated for an acting award called the Golden Horse in Taiwan, where he's been working. And so hopefully by the end of 2024, we'll be able to bring that to cinemas. That will be a theatrical release internationally. We're also working on Kazuo Ishiguro's novel, Clara and the Sun, which also has reunited us with our friend Jim Mangold, who did Walk the Line for us back at Fox, who's writing our script for us right now. We have a magnificent limited series, which is also at Netflix, Marisa's Passion, Girl A, which is a book written by a first-time novelist in the UK, Abigail Dean, and a wonderful filmmaker, Johan Renck, who you will know from Chernobyl, this magnificent HBO series that he did. Is our director, producer, and guiding light. And that right now is in development, hopefully to hit the platform next year.
So this really
There's a
represents
lot.
your move into limited series television, right?
Yeah, we're
Because
working
Yeah,
on,
we
Marissa's
sort of-
been passionately digging away at Joan Rivers' life story, a project called Can We Talk, which her daughter, the wonderful Melissa Rivers, is producing for us. And we have a great script on that. We're just about to get a director on that one. So we have all different kinds of projects. And
The foray into television is really exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, we read books and projects all the time, and to be limited to just the film medium, whether it's streaming or theatrical, we kind of got sick of that and realized that if we love something and it's a better limited series, why can't we do that? I mean, I watch everything. I voraciously, go through everything, and I just would love to have a great limited series that all my friends go, oh my God, I couldn't stop binging this, So,
Another set of tools for you.
Yeah.
That is great. Well, thank you guys for talking to
Thank
me.
you.
And now the next thing we want to do is turn to take a couple of audience questions.
What was something that you wanted to put into the movie from the book, but you couldn't put in the book that you would like to share with us?
I can take that one.
yes, please.
In the book, Connie and Mellors refer to their areas as John Thomas and Lady Jane. And they refer to each other's genitals that way quite a bit. And it's sort of a cute bantery thing with them. And it just didn't work.
It's hard. I was wondering about that part. It's really hard not to make that cringy.
So that's a D.H. Lawrence classic thing that we wanted to find
was kind of in
a
there for
way
a
to
bit of
work. It
time.
was in there sort of in voiceover a little bit. The actors really loved it. Of course, actors love that kind of thing, but you could just see people squirming in their seats, hearing that. So that, to Elizabeth's point about ratings and sort of making choices as far as we went with the sexuality here, as you saw, that may have tipped the scales. So that is one classic D.H. Lawrence thing that
the
we did leave out.
personification of genitals was
Yes.
just a bridge too far there.
Just for
on that
Elizabeth
one.
and myself alone.
The
Yes.
relatability was a little odd too. So yeah.
All right. Good question.
I'm gonna read it off of my phone, sorry. For a film that was very pensive, like this one, it relies a lot on the unspoken features. I can definitely feel, the life of Pi touch, of non-dialogue, to elevate emotion. I felt like that was done fantastically. I found the color choice and use of color very poetic, especially the reds, the whites, the blues, and the black, just to see the progression of Lady Chatterley in terms of her character arc as well as her mood. So I just wanted to know about how you went about using character through their objects and the relation to those objects for their identity for a film that's about relations itself. I think that's peak literary analysis. So I just want to know your thoughts about how you keep that literary form and analysis, not only intact, but displayed so viscerally, through color and making sure that you keep that astute, I guess, thematic commentary within your film.
Want me to take that?
Yeah, you should, because you know about the blue.
Well, from a cinematography standpoint, we've shot everything with a tint of blue, which you probably saw. So the idea was to show a cooling, calming effect to those scenes with Mellors and Connie, and that's where it's most represented in scenes with the two of them. Stylistically, in terms of things that the heads of departments did to relate to the character, I would say that Connie's hair, if you notice, is up always at the beginning or when she's with Clifford, and down when she's with Mellors, and becoming more down. It's sort of half up, half down when they're sort of having sex the first couple times, and then it's all the way down and then wet and down. So that is certainly a purposeful choice from the hair and makeup department of representing Connie's emotionality, of those progression of those relationships. The colors she wears from a costume standpoint is very purposeful. She's in that beautiful red dress when she goes to the May Day festival. May Day was the mining town where we got to see other people in the town, and it's sort of black and white. Everyone there is in very muted colors, and she's in a red and meant to stand out and meant to be awkward. And she says that to Mrs. Flint when she meets her and says, I don't really relate to anyone in this town. I feel like an outsider, and she's meant to. It's purposeful that she's in that bright red. So the heads of departments were all very aligned, from the cinematography to hair and makeup to costumes, of making sure that we're representing all of the characters. Like I mentioned before about Clifford with his radio and with the motorized wheelchair, those objects, as you asked about, certainly represented his progression and his devolve into the industry versus his marriage.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all. Thank you for coming.